Hi, I'm Paul Arthur. This is Bridge City News. Here are some of the top stories we've been following. Israel braces for retaliation after what's being called a preemptive strike against Iran's nuclear weapon ambitions. The lone survivor of the Air India crash shares his remarkable story from his hospital bed. A new wildlife overpass is named after a former Alberta premier who envisioned what is today Kananaskis country.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News.
Thanks for joining us. Israel launched a wave of preemptive strikes across Iran earlier today, killing at least 3 top military officers in what appears to be the most significant attack the country's faced since its 1980s war with Iraq. Iran retaliated, sending a swarm of drones at Israel with its supreme leader warning of severe punishment. Israel says it intercepted most of those drones, but a subsequent ballistic missile attack on Israel did see a number of missiles get through the Iron Dome defense system, resulting in at least 58 civilians being injured so far, 2 of whom are in critical condition. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced today that they will continue their attacks on Iran as long as it takes to remove the nuclear threat.
Moments ago, Israel launched Operation Rising Lion, a targeted military operation to roll back the Iranian threat to Israel's very survival. This operation will continue for as many days as it takes to remove this threat. For decades, the tyrants of Tehran have brazenly, openly called for Israel's destruction. They've backed up their genocidal rhetoric with a program to develop nuclear weapons. Today, the Jewish state refuses to be a victim of a nuclear holocaust perpetrated by the Iranian regime. Now, as Prime Minister, I've made it clear time and again, Israel will never allow those who call for our annihilation to develop the means to achieve that goal. Tonight, Israel backs those words with action. We struck at the heart of Iran's nuclear enrichment program. We struck at the heart of Iran's nuclear weaponization program. We targeted Iran's main enrichment facility in Natanz. We targeted Iran's leading nuclear scientists working on the Iranian bomb. We also struck at the heart of Iran's ballistic missile program.
Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand says de-escalation must be the priority following Israel's strikes on Iran, and that Canada remains deeply concerned by the threat posed by Iran's nuclear and ballistic missile program. She is warning all Canadians in the area to exercise a very high degree of caution and follow the advice of local authorities. Anand made the comments over social media. And although she wasn't in the House of Commons today during question period, her parliamentary secretary offered these words.
It's important to remember always that Israel has the right to defend itself. Israel has the right to continue to make sure that it is safe and secure. At the same time, this government is committed to take action against the scourge that is anti-Semitism every day in our world. We will continue to stand up and defend Jews in this community to make sure they're safe. Thank you.
Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre also weighed in on Israel's attacks on Iran today on his Facebook page. Poilievre reiterated his stance on Israel's right to defend itself by reposting some comments he made last October.
I think the idea of allowing a genocidal, theocratic, unstable dictatorship that is desperate to avoid being overthrown by its own people to develop nuclear weapons is about the most dangerous and irresponsible thing that the world could ever allow. And if Israel were to stop that genocidal, theocratic, unstable government from acquiring nuclear weapons, it would be a gift by the Jewish state to humanity.
Poilievre also called for all levels of government to take extra steps to protect Canada's Jewish community. Meantime, in Tehran, hundreds gathered on Friday to protest, demanding revenge and chanting anti-Israel and American slogans.
انتظار ما این هست که انتقام خون این شهیدان ما و دانشمندان مظلومی که در این حملات امروز همین شهید شدن گرفته بشه.
ما فریب وعده های آمریکا رو نمیخوریم. ما دست آمریکا رو پشت این جنایت میبینیم.
U.S. officials say Israel told the Trump administration about their attacks on Iran ahead of time, prompting the U.S. to order evacuations of some non-essential embassy staffers and authorize the voluntary departure of military dependents in the region. President Trump is calling Israel's deadly strikes on Iran's nuclear program and military sites excellent. Indian investigators have recovered the digital flight data recorder, known as the black box, from yesterday's Air India crash, which killed all but one person on board. An expert says the black box should quickly show if there was a loss of engine power or lift after takeoff to allow a preliminary determination of the likely cause for the crash. The plane's black box was recovered from a rooftop of the hostel the plane crashed into. The lone survivor of the crash is now sharing his remarkable tale of what happened and how he survived.
वो मेरे नज़रों के सब सामने हुआ था. मेरे खुद को भी बिलीव नहीं होता कि मैं कैसे उसमें से जिंदा बाहर निकला, क्योंकि थोड़ा टाइम के लिए कि तो मेरे को लगा था कि मैं भी मरने वाला हूँ.
ये जब फ्लाइट जब क्रैश हुई उस समय हॉस्टल पे लैंड की थी, उसी समय आप बाहर निकले थे?
नहीं, क्योंकि आई थिंक मेरे को जब मैं जो साइड पे था ना, वो साइड हॉस्टल पे नहीं लैंड हुई थी. हॉस्टल के जो ग्राउंड फ्लोर है ना, जैसे नीचे, वहाँ लैंड हुई थी. तो मुझे दूसरे के बारे में मेरे को पता नहीं, लेकिन मैं जहाँ लैंड हुआ था ना, वो नीचे की साइड थी. तो जब वहाँ थोड़ा पेस भी था प्लेन के जब बाहर, तो जब जैसे मेरा डोर टूटा ना सब, तो मैंने देखा ना जब सामने कि थोड़ा इधर पेस है, मैं ट्राई कर सकता हूँ निकलने के लिए. तो मैंने ट्राई किया निकलने के लिए, तो फिर मैं निकल गया उधर, क्योंकि अपोजिट साइड पे थे ना, वो बिल्डिंग का वो था ना दीवार, तो उधर से कोई शायद नहीं निकल सका होगा, क्योंकि उधर पूरा उधर ही क्रैश हुआ था. मैं जो जहाँ था वहाँ थोड़ा पेस था. फिर भी मेरे पता नहीं मैं कैसे बचा हूँ, क्योंकि मेरे नज़र के सामने ही सब दो एयर होस्टल वो अंकल आंटी सब उधर ही सब.
आप पैदल चल के आए वहाँ से निकल के?
हाँ. और थोड़ा जब आग लगी ना, मेरा लेफ्ट हैंड भी जल गया थोड़ा. फिर एम्बुलेंस मेरे को उठा लेके इधर आया हॉस्पिटल में.
Ramesh's brother was also on the flight but did not survive. The Federal Conservative Party has introduced a motion in the House of Commons calling for the government to recover funds paid to ArriveCan contractors and subcontractors who in fact did not do any work on the ArriveCan app. The issue came up again today during question period.
Mr. Speaker, the Auditor General confirmed what we already knew. $64 million was handed to a two-person company with no proof of work done. No security clearances, no deliverables, no competition. This was about enriching Liberal insiders, not about serving Canadians. So, Speaker, I ask, will everyone in this House stand with taxpayers and vote for our Conservative motion to get Canadians their money back?
And certainly taxpayers are owed some answers. This company has been referred to the RCMP and legal action is underway. We've also ensured that they can no longer enter into any contracts with the federal government for 7 years.
The motion requests that the government recover all funds paid to these contractors within 100 days of the motion's adoption, and that the Prime Minister presents a report proving that taxpayer funds have been repaid. This motion comes amidst scrutiny of the ArriveCan app and concerns about overspending and wasted taxpayer money. On Thursday, the federal government ordered a vote from union members on Canada Post's latest offer. This comes in the midst of a long-standing impasse between Canada Post and the Canadian Union of Postal Workers on negotiations for a new deal for workers. Amidst the potential for a second strike by the union in 6 months, a Lethbridge business has learned from the last one in late 2024 and has taken steps to ensure online deliveries will still be sent out. The manager of women's clothing store Thelma and Thistle says they switched to alternate carriers then and have kept them on for contingency, despite the costs.
Basically, we exclusively used Canada Post for about 8 years or more prior to this, and so we get certain discounts because of loyalty for all of those years. The other thing is, when we were shipping with Canada Post, I always kind of knew what to expect as far as a lost package went. They always resolved those issues super quickly. Basically, when the strike happened initially, we weren't necessarily expecting it, and so it was a bit of a scramble to figure out alternative routes and alternative carriers, kind of simultaneously trying to alleviate concerns from our customers that had already purchased items that were in the mail sitting. We did lose some parcels in the process. It was definitely, we hit the ground running trying to figure that out. So just in an abundance of caution, we're using alternative carriers despite not knowing what's going to happen. So anyone with a P.O. box, we're asking for alternative addresses. If they can't provide it and they're comfortable with us using Canada Post, we still do use Canada Post. But we're just using our alternative carriers for now, and we'll just see what happens.
A wildlife overpass on the Trans-Canada Highway on the northern tip of Kananaskis country has been named after a former Alberta premier. The Honourable Peter Lougheed Wildlife Overpass is located near Lac des Arcs, about 35 kilometres east of Canmore. Devin Dreeshen, Minister of Transportation and Economic Corridors, says naming the overpass after Premier Lougheed is a great way to honour the man whose vision helped create Kananaskis country in the first place.
In 1977, Premier Lougheed was invited to take a helicopter tour of what is now Kananaskis country. He was so impressed that he saw that his PC government soon created Kananaskis country to preserve the breathtaking landscape, rivers, streams, and waterfalls. Today, Kananaskis country covers 4,000 square kilometers and includes 5 provincial parks, along with recreational areas and ecological reserves. So it is fitting to name this overpass on the northern part of Kananaskis country in his honor.
Construction of the wildlife overpass began in 2022 and was completed in the fall of 2024. It's hoped the overpass will prevent some of the roughly 70 vehicle-wildlife collisions that happen on that stretch of the Trans-Canada every year. Lethbridge police have made the largest seizure of fentanyl in the city's history. On Wednesday afternoon, while responding to a drug complaint in a downtown parking lot, police found a man and woman in a vehicle. The woman had outstanding warrants, which led to a search of the vehicle. Police located a sawed-off shotgun, approximately 1,100 grams of fentanyl, 120 grams of cocaine, 58 grams of methamphetamine, and nearly $10,000 cash. In addition, the male was carrying more drugs, several knives, and a baton. The total street value of the drugs seized is $372,000. 48-year-old Sherry Lynn Hopkins and 48-year-old Mark Edward Tangway, both from Lethbridge, are facing a long list of drug and weapons charges. Hopkins was scheduled to appear in court today. Tangway was released from custody and is scheduled to appear in court August 7th. Weeping birch trees in Lethbridge are reportedly dying. The city says due to multiple factors such as age, disease, and climate, many of the weeping birch trees planted 50 to 60 years ago are showing signs of decline. They estimate there are 750 weeping birch trees on public land.
It's a tough place to be a tree around here. And the weeping birch seem to be particularly susceptible to our temperature extremes that we're experiencing in the past few years. So age is a factor when it comes to many of our birch trees. Yes, they are aging out, but there are still lots of younger ones that are seeing the same kind of decline. They are native to Europe and Western or Eastern Europe, Western Asia kind of area. So they do prefer a cooler and wetter climate. Through the magic of irrigation, we were able to get a lot of these trees established. But once they start experiencing these harsh environmental conditions, it enters them into a decline spiral. And once a tree is in decline, it becomes a dinner bell for pest species. There's a pest called bronze birch borer that exists in the boreal forest up north. It's generally a pest of our native paper birch. But that pest has found its way down into Lethbridge and all over Alberta and the prairies over time.
The city says they are no longer planting weeping birch and over time will replace those in unhealthy conditions with various other species, such as maples, lindens, oak trees, and honey locusts. Their main goal right now is to diversify the tree populations. The city of Lethbridge has unveiled a new mural near the Father Leonard Van Tighem School that was made with collaboration with experienced muralists and students from the school. The mural was created combining designs from 80 students during workshops with muralists from La Art. It took 6 days for the students and muralists to paint a pedestrian underpass that crosses under University Drive. The artwork serves as the city's youth engagement pilot project to pair young artists with professionals.
My experience with this mural project was amazing. I got to work with the kids and they did such an amazing job and they were so proud of their art, and it was so amazing to see them come up with the colors and the designs, and I'm just really proud of this school and everything they've done, and doing this project was one of my favorite projects I've ever done. It's awesome.
It was really satisfying to see their pride in the project and have them be a part of every part of the project as well. So that was really exciting.
Yeah, and just for them to know that what they do matters. You know, there's such little hands and little minds and little voices, but what they do is just as important as what we as adults do. So contributing creatively to this beautiful landscape, I think, is really, really important to us.
The city says this mural will serve as an informative experience for future public art program initiatives. The annual Lethbridge Farmers Market will reopen Saturday. Since 1971, the local fair has offered shoppers the opportunity to purchase fresh baked goods grown with at least 80% local ingredients. The market is held every Saturday from 8 till 1 p.m. in the UFA Hall at the Agri-Food and Trade Center until October 11th. Paul King-Smith, Director of Event Development for the Lethbridge and District Exhibition, says attendees can also enjoy food trucks, live music, and presentations from community partners.
A few different things that we're trying this year. Number one, this will be the third year that we're working in this building in the Agri-Food Hub and Trade Center, so we're starting to learn the layout a little bit. Some of the vendors that will be in the main corridor here at the Agri-Food Hub and Trade Center, as we try to make it a more cohesive experience, as some of those vendors are outside, some are inside. So we'll have our busker program going, which has happened traditionally with live music, but as well we're introducing some theme days. Some days we're celebrating things in the community, so things like summer solstice. We are having a quilting demonstration as part of our first market as well. We have bakeries and we have cheese makers, we have wine makers, and then we also have hot food options.
In addition to the Saturday fair, the Wednesday Lethbridge Farmers Market, produced in collaboration with the downtown BRZ, will be open from 9 till 2 in Festival Square from July 2nd to August 27th. Coming up next, we'll take a look at our forecast.
Our 7-day forecast has it with a chance of thunder showers for today with a high of 23. The weekend will have highs of 25 with sunny skies. Monday will share this temperature. Tuesday will have a high of 24 with a chance of showers. Both Wednesday and Thursday have highs of 25 and some nice sunny skies. Today's almanac has it with an average high of 22 for today with an average low of 9. The record high on this day was set back in 2013 with 31, and the record low is set back in 1915 with -7. The sun rose at 5:23 a.m. today and set at 9:40 p.m. Our national forecast has Vancouver with a high of 19 and partly cloudy skies. Victoria has a high of 20 with sunny skies. Edmonton has a chance of thunder showers with a high of 19, alongside Calgary with a high of 23. The rest of the prairies have Saskatoon with a high of 23 and a chance of thunder showers. Regina also gets a chance of thunder showers with a high of 27. Winnipeg has a high of 23 and sunny skies. Central Canada, we have Ottawa and Toronto with both highs of 21 and sunny skies. Montreal gets a high of 23 and sunny skies. Atlantic Canada has Fredericton with a high of 20 and partly cloudy skies. Halifax has a high of 18 with a chance of showers. Charlottetown also gets a chance of showers with a high of 16, and finishing off our national forecast with St. John's, we have a high of 15 and partly cloudy skies.
Canada's manufacturing sales experienced the largest monthly drop since October 2023, down nearly 3% in April. The massive drop comes as a result of the tariff dispute with the U.S. impacting the industry. StatsCan says that sales of petroleum and coal products were down close to 11%, while motor vehicles dropped over 8% and primary metals saw the lowest decline. Roughly half of manufacturers surveyed by StatsCan say they were being affected by tariffs in some form in April, as did 43% of the wholesalers. The Alberta government is considering letting oil companies inject wastewater deep underground. A government-appointed committee is studying ways to manage the toxic tailings accumulating in the oil sands. The committee says the tailings could be disposed of underneath many layers of impermeable rock to avoid ruining sources of drinking water. But there are more than 1.4 trillion liters of tailings as of 2023, and the committee says this cannot be the only option. Now, here's a look at today's markets.
The TSX was down 111 points on the day to finish at 26,504. The Dow was down 769 to 42,197. The S&P 500 was down 68 to 5,976, and the Nasdaq was down 255 points to 19,406. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up $5.08 to $73.12 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 11 cents to $3.61 US. Gold was up 46.25 to $34.32.27 US an ounce, and silver was down 4 cents to $36.30 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $8.76 per bushel, barley is at $6.94, canola is at $15.96, and corn is at $7.75 per bushel. Live cattle June contract was down $3.10 to $2.25.10. Feeder cattle August contract was down $4.82 to $3.06.42, and lean hogs were up 5 cents to $1.03.70. And the Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours and currently sits at $73.60 US.
Recapping one of our top stories, Israel continues its preemptive strikes on Iran's nuclear sites, killing 3 top military officers. Iran is retaliating with ballistic missile strikes, some of which have penetrated Israel's Iron Dome defense system, resulting in at least 58 civilians being injured so far, 2 of whom are in critical condition. A local church congregation in Saguenay, Quebec is launching a court challenge after being abruptly evicted from their city-owned rental facility because the city believes the arrangement violates Quebec's secularism law. We'll hear from the church's legal representative, Olivier Seguin, coming up next. When you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. You can also visit our website or YouTube channel anytime to check out more of our stories and interviews. The province of Quebec has for years been working overtime to become as secular as possible, even putting a secularism law in place. And this is now having an impact on a Christian congregation in the city of Saguenay, as they have been evicted from their rental facility because it happens to be a publicly owned facility. So joining us to discuss what's going on here is Olivier Seguin. He is a lawyer with the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. Good to have you with us, Olivier.
Thank you for having me.
You bet. Well, can you share, first of all, a bit of the backstory with us? I mean, when and how was the Church of Two Shores notified of their eviction?
Okay, so I would say that this case is very, very simple. It's a proceeding of like 2 pages. What's really relevant is like the topic of secularism, basically. So they rented a facility at the end of 2024. For a period of 2 years, I believe, something like that. And a couple weeks after they rented it, they received a message coming from, basically the manager of the rent, which was not the city, but quoting an email that they received from the city, saying that according to the, I'll call it the secularism law, it's basically, I mean, I won't say it in French, but there's an act about secularism that is not precise. It needs to be interpreted. A bit like a constitution must be interpreted. It says that the state must be separate from religions, must be neutral, equality of citizens, liberty, I would say freedom of religion, freedom of conscience. And that's basically that. So it has to be interpreted by basically every public body that belongs to the province. So interpreted in a certain way. And they decided that because they were celebrating the Mass on Sunday, they were renting it for basically like an hour a week to celebrate Mass because it was religious, like their activity was religious. They interpreted their, let's say, the law, the Secularism Act, as I said, as not permitting it.
Okay, so basically the facility manager or whatever, they got a letter from or an email from the city, and so they basically passed this on to the folks, the church renting this facility. And so there were no complaints from the public. I mean, they're not being rowdy, nothing like that, right?
The story, but we don't exactly know. But I heard, let's say, from a house. Horse mouth, is that?
Yeah, from the horse's mouth. Okay, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so yes, it came from a complaint from a citizen.
Oh.
I would say Saguenay is an interesting place in a way. It's known to have like I would say a vibrant Christian and conservative and Christian. There's a lot of like I would say very strong. It's strong in terms of Catholic faith. Our clients are not Catholic. That being said, they're Protestant. But it's also known for, I would say a strong dedication to secularism.
So you have this clash of the two streams, and there's actually a strong.
There's a clash, a very strong clash, almost a war, I can say, because two camps.
So now the city, by the way, just to clarify, they were aware, right, from the beginning that the facility was actually going to be used for a religious service?
They basically delegate I would say the renting of the leases to basically to a management group.
Oh, okay, I gotcha. So they knew about it, but they're not the city. So again, through this complaint, okay, gotcha. Just to kind of find out how this all came to be. All right. Now, okay, so basically, because it's a public facility, that's what this is all about, right? So, and again, this is a Quebec secularism law. Maybe could you just clarify what that all entails, the secularism law? Because I know it's separation between the state and the religion, right? Now, this ties in, of course, with religious symbols, clothing not being allowed, for teachers or, police officers, doctors, nurses, that sort of thing, right?
Yeah. So it was, it comes from, I would say the insister of that was not voted for political reasons. There was the Quebec Values Charter that was never voted in 2016, I think, under the Parti Québécois. In 2019 was voted basically the same thing. It was another name under another party, which is called, let's say in English, the secularism law. So it basically says, I would say it's in two parts plus the notwithstanding clause. It starts basically by saying like principle. It states that the state is secular, and it states like a few principle. I mentioned it earlier of like what constitute secularism. In French, it's called laïcité. Laicity. It's like the translation of that word. I'm not sure that it really exists in English, but they called it laicity even in English. Separation from church and state. I was like religion to be broader. Neutrality, of course, equality.
So the government needs to be neutral in all of this toward religion, right?
That's it. And then it also mentions freedom of religion and freedom of conscience.
So the secularism law still has to respect freedom of conscience and freedom of religion, right?
Yeah, that's it. Correct. Then, okay, it says that it must apply to basically every government entities. We speak obviously of Quebec government entities. And then there's almost, I would say, a dress code. Like you cannot wear the kippah, this and that, like a religious symbol. It's not obvious, like it's not directly aiming things like the kippah, but like we need to be honest when we look at what happens. And I would say that the driving force of that was like a reaction to Muslims, basically.
Right, because there's been a large immigration level that's come into Montreal, et cetera, and very noticeable, of course. And so there was a public pushback to that, you mean?
Yeah,
okay.
Like it's. I mean, it's not official, but it almost is. And in fact, like we have, and I'm just trying to explain it sociologically, but we have like a much bigger community of Muslim people in Quebec that you have in English, for like immigration reasons that touch with language and this and that. And at the end of the of this act, there is the notwithstanding clause, which basically say that the Canadian Charter and the Human Rights Charter of Quebec doesn't apply. So it could be it's very interesting, I would say, theoretically, like how should we construe it if the charter doesn't apply, but there are some principle in the law. So anyway,
so where do you find that line to walk, right? Because I don't think, even most Quebecers or most Canadians wouldn't be really happy if there was, you said, well, you can't go to church ever, Well, I mean, that would be, it would be obviously very, very wrong, right? But here, though, again, the law isn't just words on paper. It has, the effect of the law has a tangible impact on real human beings. In this case, for example, there's the pastors of this church, the congregants, the people who are going to the church. They are now, well, there's no building for them to, so how did this impact them? And what was their response?
Okay, so it was not a problem for them. Like they quickly found another premises in another church. So we're not even asking the court to give them back the premises that they rent. This case is, I would say, really about I must be honest. I joined them and they didn't join me, and I explained them how it was like really important to. I would say to have a discussion in court about the scope of this law, the secularism law. So of course, like we defend it. It's free. It's based on donations that are it's basically financed by the Justice Center. And like we really fight here for freedom of religion. It's not really about them, because indeed they found another place. They're happy where they are. They don't want to like impose, if they're not welcome there, they don't want to rent a place if they're not welcome. It's
right, but it's a slippery slope, and it's an important case, isn't it? Because I mean, there's a lot at stake in this particular case, right? Because, depending on how this case turns out, it sets a precedent for religious freedom in Quebec, doesn't it?
That's right. I would say that there's always, I would say, a balancing that we need to do, a risk assessment. Like if we fight a case and we lose, it sets a precedent that might be harmful. So we choose our case always like assessing the risks, and in this case, let's say we don't fight it, it's going to be applied. Factually speaking, it's going to be applied by other cities in the same way. It's going to become part of, let's say, the customs, the way that the law is being interpreted. But what you say is right. If we lose or if we win, there's, there's something at stake. So yeah, absolutely. And it's about interpreting the secularism law probably more. I'll have to think about it, but probably more than even like charter rights, because there is the notwithstanding clause.
So how are you? What's your argument going to be before the judge? What's your basic? This is why we're right, and the city is wrong.
At the end of the day, it's there's like one part. The Secularism Act states a few principles. One of those principles is like freedom of religion. Freedom of religion is part of like secularism. Okay, so based on that, it shouldn't be interpreted by a city in this manner. And secondly, if it shouldn't be interpreted in this manner, like let alone the fact that it's ultra virus, it's also unconstitutional, because if it's not based on this law that contained the notwithstanding clause, then the charter applies, the Canadian charter. So I would say
okay. Well, I mean, I think you have a good case. I mean, I guess it depends on who you get as a judge, but I mean, it seems to go too far, doesn't it? And again, where do you go from there? So what if the Pope visits Saguenay and speaks at City Hall? Are they going to say no? You'll have to speak somewhere else, sir. Right? Or what if a church group is helping feed the poor and they're renting a public facility? Do they get kicked out? Well, I mean, what kind of support is this particular case getting from the public? Is there a lot of, rumbling in the city on this particular issue?
I would say this case, and those are discussions that we have in term. There is, at the moment that we speak, a committee that's reunited. It's named by the government to basically to think about secularism, and without going in too much details, we know that they are very inclined to use the notwithstanding clause, and they're not. I would say that they're not too friendly with religion. Like, to be honest, like I still think that what they have in mind is basically Muslims. That being said, they don't really like Christians as well.
Okay.
I don't think that's is the driving force, but they don't really like Christians. So in Quebec, we've been very, I would say, very reserved. We have an interview with you. Like, this was in our news release in English, but here in Quebec, there's a discussion that I want to have with the court, and we don't make too much noise.
Very interesting. So it's a different culture, isn't it? So than in the rest of Canada, for sure. Okay. Well, thank you for taking the time to kind of just give us a bit of the background, explaining what's kind of going on behind the scenes and so forth, and why this is important. I think it is. So appreciate your time, Olivier.
Thank you again for having me.
Yeah, all the best in this upcoming case here. Olivier Seguin is a lawyer with the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms.
A group of researchers from all over the world are closely examining the long-term effects that spaceflight has on the human mind and body. There are 2 Canadian experts involved in the research project, and they are both from our own University of Lethbridge. Joining us today to tell us more about this is Dr. Gerlinda Metz. She is a professor with the University of Lethbridge's Canadian Centre for Behavioral Neuroscience. Dr. Metz, it's great to have you with us. Welcome back to Bridge City News.
Thank you so much, Naveen. I'm glad to be here.
Well, great to have you back on our show again. And it must be exciting to be working with a team of experts from all around the world. Can you just share a little bit more about what this research will be trying to accomplish?
So we're very excited that we're part of this very significant project because it is NASA's largest ever research effort with human subjects, with astronauts. And so they're actually attempting to integrate an immense amount of data all together into one cohesive database to make better sense of health for astronauts. And this project is directed by Dr. Afshin Beheshti, who is a professor and director of the Space Biomedicine Institute at the University of Pittsburgh. And he has a long record of working with NASA. And on the team are also Tony Montina, who is the NMR and MRI facility director here at the University of Lethbridge. So we're very excited to be a part of this large research effort.
So you're talking about the University of Pittsburgh, you're talking about NASA. How did all this come together, and why the University of Lethbridge?
Actually, we already had established collaboration with NASA for a number of years. We have helped them to investigate molecules in the body, in blood and urine that we obtained from space, from the astronauts who lived on the International Space Station for a prolonged mission. And so these projects have been going very well. And we were invited to continue this collaboration and actually expand with additional numbers of samples. And so here now we have access to this very significant amount of data so that we can integrate our data with their database that involves multiple levels of biological regulations that are linked to spaceflight. And this is a really exciting project and very important also as a learning experience, not only for space flight, because we are going into becoming a more of a spacefaring civilization these days, but really we're also learning important lessons for life on Earth as well.
So what is your role in particular going to be focusing on?
So our project will focus on molecular chemistry. We will actually investigate small molecules called metabolites in urine and blood of astronauts. So they're giving us samples from before they went to space, during the space station stay in the mission, and then after they returned back to Earth. And so we have a long time course of regular samples being collected, which is very exciting. And so we can actually look at individual astronaut samples and how they changed over time, but we can also compare across different individuals. And what is also really phenomenal in this project is that for the first time we'll have a larger group of female astronauts, because small astronauts are males. And we didn't actually have many studies that investigated sex differences, so how females compare to males. And females have very different health conditions and stress responses than males. And it is very important to learn more about how do we better while we're on a long duration space mission, and what do we expect in terms of health outcomes, what can we predict for male versus female astronauts.
So you're talking about blood and urine samples before they go to space and then after they return home. What kind of differences have you noticed with these blood and urine samples before and after?
It's very interesting that actually males adapt a little bit faster to the stress and the mission when they're going to the International Space Station than females would. And we need to take this into account in what kind of markers we're looking for. And it's very important to look at these small metabolites, these small molecules in very accessible samples like urine that you can easily provide, so we can follow up with health measurements. And this is important when we go to space, because space is a very, very harsh environment. These astronauts are going through extreme levels of stress, not only psychologically, but also physiologically and physically. We have also microgravity or zero gravity. We have lower levels of a magnetic field than we have on Earth. We have very cold temperatures. We have very dry air. We also have various levels of radiation. This is a very harsh environment that astronauts enter into, and there are all kinds of health complications that they might be at risk. And so we want to better understand, with looking at these molecules, what risks are they to be expected, but also how can we produce countermeasures and treatments for them to prevent these adverse health outcomes for them.
And you mentioned one of your colleagues, Tony Montina, who is also working on the project. Can you explain a bit about what his focus will be on?
So my colleague, Tony Montina, he's the director of the NMR facility. We're using what we call nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy. That is a mouthful, but what we're doing is we study small molecules. And when you look, for example, at a urine sample, you actually have 200 different types of these small molecules you can measure. So it's like a very personal fingerprint of what is going on inside of the body. Every cell is producing these small metabolites, and they are then measurable in liquids or in any tissue of the body. But here, when we work with urine, we have to make sure we're looking at these metabolites as a kind of a reflection of what is going on inside the body and inside our cells.
It's just so fascinating how spaceflight can affect your body and can affect the mind. And apparently spaceflight also affects mitochondria, which generate energy for the human cell. What do we know about how and why mitochondria is changed by spaceflight, and what are some potential solutions?
So mitochondria are like the powerhouses of the cell. Every cell has mitochondria. And what happens when we're going through extreme stress, or we're especially entering a space environment, these mitochondria might go into, some at least, into a dysfunctional state. This is such an extreme impact on the body to go to space with all the different stresses going on, that mitochondria might be disrupted in their normal function. So they actually produce less energy than what we would like to see and what the body would need. Because every cell has mitochondria, and because organs are made out of cells, cells can actually lead to diseases in various organs through mitochondrial disruption. So this is something that is a very important learning experience, because what we're seeing also in aging on Earth often is that mitochondria become dysfunctional. So we actually learn a great deal about aging on Earth. So what can we do about it? That's an important question. And we have actually developed on Earth, through many clinical studies, various drug treatments that can improve mitochondrial function. Now that we know, that's actually based on Dr. Afshin Beheshti's work, that mitochondria are dysfunctional in space. We can use and test some of these therapies that we have available, and maybe even dietary countermeasures could be effective. So, for example, think of antioxidants that reduce the amount of cellular stress that would protect mitochondria in their function. There are many other ways of how drugs could affect and boost mitochondrial function. And so these need to be tested now that we have realized that there is an issue. We can now hopefully help astronauts stay healthier for longer in space.
And I'm told that astronauts have a higher risk of cancer. And you had mentioned earlier that there's a lot of radiation up in space, so that might be behind it. But what else would be behind it other than radiation? And will your research be exploring this area as well?
So cancer, indeed, like you say, is a very important risk factor that we need to take into account for space flight. And we have low levels of radiation. We also have ionizing, very strong resources of radiation, such as solar flares produced when the sun is very active and it's going through cycles where it's more or less active. And when it's highly active, this is more putting a higher risk on the body. Also, we have cosmic radiation that is always there, and we have ionizing radiation when particles meet the Earth's magnetic field. So we have various sources of radiation that can potentially cause cancer. So that is a significant risk factor. We are also worried about that, for example, for pilots who actually go into higher levels of in our atmosphere, and they also experience potentially higher levels of radiation by flying. So we need to learn about these health risks. What this radiation can actually do is induce DNA damage. So that's the genetic code in our cells, and that can actually trigger some cancerous risk factors that lead to tumor growth in the body. And we have to learn about these risks and also how to prevent them, potentially through drugs or dietary countermeasures.
And what about eye disorders from spaceflight? What is it that affects the eyes negatively?
Yeah, there are actually various risk factors again when we go to outer space. First of all, the weightlessness we're going through lower levels of gravity is shifting the fluids in the body. And actually, we have more liquids, more fluids going into our heads and our upper body. So this actually can affect the eyes, and often we're seeing also that faces become more puffy over time when they're in space. We might adapt to that with longer periods in space to some degree, but still we still talk about this kind of puffy face or moon face in astronauts because the fluids in the body are moving up. So this can also change the pressure inside of the brain. It can also change the pressure inside of our eye bulbs. And it will push the eye bulbs to be flatter than we usually have, which leads to the picture not displaying correctly on the retina. In addition, we also have issues with radiation that can harm the retina, which includes nerve cells and the optic nerve as well. So we might have some degenerative changes there over time. And that's something to be concerned about as well.
And then there's some other health risks. I'll just list off a few here. Cardiovascular disease, renal issues such as kidney stones, disruption of circadian rhythms are also risks. And I've even heard that some astronauts experience bone loss.
Yeah, that's actually a factor that many think of first when they think about space flights, because with the zero gravity or low levels of putting our weight on the body, we are losing bone mass over time. And that's something we also experience on Earth with aging, that often we do have more breakable bones, more sensitive bones. And so astronauts experience that at a much higher, faster rate than we have on Earth. So astronauts might experience 1% of bone loss in actually a few days, whereas on Earth we experience 3% of bone loss within a decade. So it goes really, really fast for astronauts. And that's because they don't put enough weight on their legs, for example. So the legs become very sensitive to damage. And there are several countermeasures. For example, astronauts are recommended to exercise for at least 2 hours a day. Exercise helps, and muscle activity is important because also we lose muscle mass when we're in outer space, for the same reasons that we're not putting enough weight on our limbs and we don't stay upright.
Dr. Gerlinda Metz is a professor with the University of Lethbridge's Canadian Centre for Behavioral Neuroscience and is part of a global research team studying the long-term effects of spaceflight. Dr. Metz, thank you so much for your time today and sharing your expertise with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Likewise, I'm Naveen Day on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.